Desmond Okafor was 40 years old, a man who had spent 15 years learning that the most powerful position in any room was the one nobody was watching. He wore reading glasses he didn't need in meetings because they made people underestimate the speed of his thinking. He drove a four-door Honda Accord, white, with a small dent above the rear wheel he'd never fixed. He kept a single note card in his shirt pocket, not his phone, a note card, where he wrote the 3 most important things he needed to do that day. When all 3 were done, he went home. His wife Priya told him she was leaving on a Wednesday evening in April. She said it the way someone announces a decision that has already been fully made, with the particular calm of a person who has done the emotional work in private and is now simply delivering the conclusion. She said she had been unhappy for a long time. She said she had met someone. She said, because she needed him to understand the full shape of her thinking, that Marcus, the man she was leaving him for, was a senior partner at a consulting firm, drove a Porsche Cayenne, and had a life that looked like what she had always imagined her life should look like. "I love you," she said, "but I need more than this. I need someone who has actually made it." He looked at her. He took the note card out of his shirt pocket. He looked at it. All 3 things were done. He put it back. He said he understood. He told her he hoped she'd be happy. She was already at the door when she said it, half-turned, coat on, keys in hand. She said it the way people say things they've been saving, with the release of something finally spoken. "I upgraded, Desmond." She pulled the door closed behind her. 6 months later, she would see his face on the front page of the Wall Street Journal's deal-making section, above the fold, next to the headline, "Okafor Capital Closes 2. $1 billion acquisition of Meridian Tech Group." She would be at her office. She would be alone. What happened next would cost her everything she thought she had traded up to. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The note card that morning had read, "Term sheet review by 8. Paul Hendricks. Send wire confirmation." Desmond was at his desk by 6:15. The office was on the 22nd floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan, and at that hour, the only light came from the monitors and the pale beginning of the city outside the windows. He preferred it that way. The first 2 hours of the morning were when he did the work that required silence. Desmond Okafor had spent 15 years in private equity and corporate acquisitions, the last 7 as the founding partner of Okafor Capital, a firm so deliberately understated that its website had 4 pages, no photographs of the partners, and a contact form with a response time of 48 hours. The firm managed $3 billion in assets under management across a portfolio of technology, infrastructure, and healthcare investments. It had 13 employees and had never in 7 years issued a press release. This was not an oversight, it was a principle. He had built the firm on a philosophy borrowed from the way rivers move, not by announcing themselves, but by finding the lowest ground and following it with complete commitment. The deals that lasted, in his experience, were the ones that were fully formed before anyone else in the room understood what was being built. Speed mattered. Silence protected speed. He wore the reading glasses and drove the white Accord and kept the note cards, and nobody at a dinner party, meeting him for the first time, would have guessed what he was. He had been at dinners where people asked him what he did, and when he said private equity, they nodded and turned to the person next to them, because private equity was the kind of answer that stopped conversations. He had never corrected that impression. He had spent 8 years correcting it for Priya, explaining the work, explaining the structure of the firm, explaining why the Accord made sense when a car was just a car and capital was better deployed elsewhere, and in the end she had heard none of it. She had looked at him and seen the glasses and the Honda and the note cards and decided she understood what she was looking at. She had been wrong in the most expensive way a person can be wrong. He would later mark that Wednesday evening in April as the last night he made the mistake of assuming that explaining a thing was the same as making it understood. The apartment smelled like the dinner she hadn't made. She had been home before him, he could tell by the coat on the hook, the shoes by the door, but she had not started cooking, which was the first signal that the evening was going to be different. He had set his bag on the chair and loosened his tie and gone to the kitchen for water, and that was when she had come in from the bedroom. She was dressed to go out, not dressed the way she dressed to meet friends, dressed carefully, with intention, in the way she dressed when she needed to feel like a version of herself she had decided to become. He noticed the earrings. He noticed the coat was already in her hand. He filed both away without deciding what they meant. She sat at the kitchen table. He stayed standing. She said the things she had prepared to say. The unhappiness, the length of it, the accumulation of small disappointments that had built into a conclusion she couldn't undo. He listened without interrupting. He had learned, in 15 years of deal-making, that the most important information in any conversation came after the person finished the thing they had planned to say. "His name is Marcus," she said. "He's a senior partner at Callaway Strategies. He's been there 12 years. Desmond said nothing. He has a life, Desmond, a real one. The kind I've been asking you to build with me for 8 years. She looked at him. "You're a good man, you're thoughtful and you're kind, but you've been the same for 8 years, and I need someone who's going somewhere." He looked at her. He looked at the earrings. He thought about the coat already in her hand. She had been planning to leave tonight, regardless of how this conversation went. He had come home to a conclusion, not a conversation. He didn't say that. He said, "I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed." She stood. She put on the coat. She picked up the bag she'd placed near the door. He noticed it now, positioned for a quick exit, not dropped where she always dropped it, that had been there when he came in. He had walked right past it. He filed that away too. She was at the door when she said it. "I upgraded Desmond." He looked at her for a moment. Not with anger, not with the desire to correct her, with the very specific, very quiet attention of a man who has just been handed a piece of information he is going to need later. "I hope it's everything you want," he said. She left. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. He picked up his water glass. He set it in the sink. He took the note card out of his shirt pocket, turned it over to the blank side, and wrote one word on it. "Wait." He put it back in his pocket and went to his desk. The year before that Wednesday, Desmond had been in the middle of the longest and most complex transaction of his career. Meridian Tech Group was a mid-sized enterprise software company based in Austin, profitable, underleveraged, and run by a founder who had built something excellent and was exhausted by it. The founder, a man named Howard Chen, had been looking for an exit that would protect his employees and his product. He had been approached by 3 larger firms in the previous 2 years and had turned down all 3 because, as he told Desmond at their first meeting over breakfast in Austin, he didn't trust any of them to leave the thing he'd built intact. Desmond had listened to that for 20 minutes. Then he had asked Howard 2 questions, not about the financials, not about the cap table, but about the specific decisions Howard had made in the company's 3rd year that had determined its architecture. Howard had answered both questions in detail. Then he had looked at Desmond for a moment and said, "You've read the product documentation." Desmond had said, "I read everything before the first meeting." They had shaken hands at the end of that breakfast. The formal process had taken 14 months. The due diligence had been meticulous. The structure of the deal, a full acquisition with a 3-year founder retention package and an employee equity conversion that Howard had asked for specifically, had been negotiated with the patience of two people who both understood that the right deal was worth more than the fast one. The total value, $2, $1 billion. The transaction had been in its final documentation phase when Priya left. Desmond had been reviewing the closing term sheet the morning of that Wednesday. He had been 3 weeks from the wire. He had not told Priya. He had not told her because, for 8 years, she had not asked. He had explained the firm, had explained the work, had tried to translate what it meant to run a $3 billion operation from an office with 13 people and a website with 4 pages, and she had heard Honda Accord. Reading glasses. Note cards, same. He had stopped trying to translate 18 months ago. He had simply continued doing the work. There had been a man on his team named Gerald Pratt, a senior associate, 34 years old, the kind of analyst who arrived early and stayed late and sent revision notes at 11 p.m. with the same unfussy precision at which he sent them at 10 a.m. Gerald had told Desmond once, during a long evening in the Austin due diligence room, "You know what I've learned from watching you work? You never try to look like what you are. You just are it." Gerald had meant it as an observation. Desmond had heard it as the cleanest description of his philosophy he had ever encountered. That was what Priya had never understood. She had looked at how he appeared and concluded she understood what he was. She had been looking at the wrong data. Until the morning the journal published the story, and the data corrected her. Her name was Iris Nakamura. She was 62 years old, a former M&A attorney who had spent 25 years at one of New York's largest firms before leaving to run her own boutique practice from a 2-room office on the Upper East Side. She was small, precise, wore her silver hair in a short cut that required no maintenance, and had a mind that worked the way a good contracts clause worked, nothing ambiguous, nothing that could be read 2 ways, everything serving one clear purpose. She had been Desmond's personal attorney for 9 years, not his firm's corporate counsel, his personal counsel, the person who handled everything that Okafor Capital's structure did not. She had drafted his prenuptial agreement. She had also, without being asked, kept a file on Priya for the last 3 years, not surveillance, not investigation, simply the file that an attorney with Iris's experience kept when she watched a client's marriage moving in a direction she recognized. She had not said anything to Desmond. She had been waiting for him to call. He called on Thursday morning, the day after Priya left. Iris picked up on the second ring. She said, "Come in at 9 tomorrow. I'll have everything ready." He arrived at 9:03. The 2-room office smelled like coffee and old paper, and the particular stillness of a place where consequential things happened without ceremony. Iris was at her desk with a folder and a fresh legal pad. She looked up when he came in, assessed him the way she always assessed him, quickly, accurately, and said, "Sit down and let me get through this before you ask questions." He sat. She opened the folder. The first page was a financial summary she had prepared using publicly available and subpoenaed with consent records. During the marriage, a joint brokerage account that Desmond had funded exclusively had been used, over 14 months, as a conduit for a series of transfers to a separate account in Priya's name alone. The transfers had been structured as ordinary investment rebalancing, small enough individually to clear without review flags, consistent enough in timing to suggest deliberate patterning. 43 transfers. Combined total $318,000. Desmond looked at the number. He said, "Nothing." "I noticed the pattern 11 months ago," Iris said. "I documented it and waited. I didn't want to come to you with a hypothesis." He nodded. She turned to the second page. The separate account, the one receiving the transfers, had been opened 17 months ago. That was 4 months before Priya had, by her own account to Desmond, first met Marcus. The account's opening date meant the financial preparation had preceded the stated relationship by a significant margin. Desmond looked at the date. He thought about the earrings, the coat already in her hand, the bag by the door. He thought about the specific composure of a woman who had not simply decided to leave, but had been preparing to leave while continuing to live inside the life she was preparing to leave. "How long?" he said. The account opening suggests she began planning at least 17 months before she left. The relationship with Marcus, Iris paused. "That is less clear. What I can tell you is that Callaway Strategies has a corporate entertainment account at a restaurant on East 54th that shows 12 dinners over the past 14 months, at least 4 of which the reservation is listed under 2 names, one of which is Priya's." He folded his hands on his knees. "Third document," Iris said. She placed the final page on the desk. It was a print of a recent UC filing, a personal property lien registered in New York State against assets in Priya's name, including the furniture from the apartment and 2 pieces of jewelry that had been gifts from Desmond. The lien had been filed by Marcus Hale, that was his surname. Desmond now knew. 2 weeks after Priya left, it secured a personal loan Priya had taken from Marcus for $85,000. The filing date was 6 days ago. Desmond looked at it. He looked at all 3 documents together: the extracted transfers, the account timeline, the lien. He saw the shape of it. Not a woman who had fallen in love and followed her heart. A woman who had been building an exit for 17 months, who had positioned herself financially before she moved, and who had moved into an arrangement that was already, 6 days in, financially encumbered by the man she had described as her upgrade. He picked up his note card. He wrote 2 words. Then he looked at Iris. "The Meridian closing is in 3 weeks," he said. "I know," she said. "I've been watching the trade press." She reached over and refilled his coffee. "Gerald tells me the documentation is in final review." He looked at her. "Gerald didn't tell you that." She said nothing. He almost smiled. "You talked to Gerald. Gerald is observant," she said, "and he was worried about you." She placed her reading glasses on the desk. "What do you want to do?" "The closing happens on schedule," Desmond said. "Nothing changes." "And after?" He looked at the note card. The 2 words he had written were, "Be patient." "After," he said, "we let the arithmetic speak." He didn't move fast. That was the part she had counted on, in the wrong direction. She had left expecting slowness, the slow grief of a man recalibrating, the slow practical work of separation. The slow accumulation of months before anything changed in the world she had stepped out of. Slow was what she had predicted, because slow was what she had observed for 8 years. What she had observed for 8 years was not slowness. It was concentration. Iris had filed the dissolution petition the Monday after their meeting. She had served it through Priya's attorney, a man named Douglas Fenn, who practiced family law in Midtown and who, as Iris noted to Desmond afterward, had seemed surprised by the thoroughness of the financial documentation attached to the petition. The $318,000 in structured transfers was characterized accurately. The 17-month account history was laid out in sequence. The lien filed by Marcus Hale was included as an exhibit. Priya called Desmond on Tuesday afternoon. He let it go to voicemail. Her message was brief and careful. She said she'd received the petition. She wanted to talk. She thought there was a version of this that didn't have to be adversarial. The carefulness was a tell. She had spoken to Fenn. Fenn had told her something that changed the texture of her expectations. She called again Wednesday evening. That message was longer, less careful. She mentioned the transfers, said there was an explanation, said it was more complicated than it looked, said she hadn't been trying to deceive him. He listened to both voicemails once. He did not call back. 3 weeks later, Oakfor Capital closed the acquisition of Meridian Tech Group. 2. $1 billion. The wire cleared at 11:14 am on a Thursday. Howard Chen was in the room. Gerald was in the room. Iris was in the room because Desmond had asked her to be, and because she had earned it. Desmond had asked the firm's communications director, a position that had not previously existed at Oakfor Capital, created 6 weeks before the closing at Iris's quiet suggestion, to prepare a press statement. Not a long one, not a triumphant one, a factual one, the acquisition, the terms, the founder retention structure, the employee equity conversion. The statement was sent to the Journal, the Financial Times, and the Wire at 11:30 am. By 2 p.m, the Journal had called back. They wanted a photograph. Desmond sat for it in the conference room at 3:15. No tie. The reading glasses on because he always wore them. The same white shirt he'd been wearing all day. The photograph ran the next morning, front page of the deal-making section, above the fold. He was not in the office when it ran. He had been at the office since 6:15 am and had left at 7 in the evening and had gone home to the apartment he had taken in September, smaller than the one he and Priya had shared, quieter, a view of the building across the street, and a desk near the window where he worked in the mornings, and had been asleep by 10. He found out she had seen it from Gerald, who had been told by someone who knew someone who worked 2 floors below Callaway Strategies, and had watched Priya pull up the Journal website on her office computer at 8:47 in the morning and stay very still for a long time. Gerald had texted Desmond at 9:15. She saw it. Desmond had read the text at 9:22, between a call with Howard's transition team and a call with the investor relations contact at the first portfolio company scheduled for review. He had set his phone face down on the desk. He had picked up his note card. He had written the 3 things he needed to do that day. He had started on the first one. Desmond arrived at the offices of Feldman and Osai on the 19th floor of the building on Lexington Avenue 30, 4 minutes early. He liked it that way. The conference room had a long table and pale wood walls, and the kind of quiet that came from thick carpeting and a floor high enough above the street that traffic was a suggestion rather than a sound. The morning light came in from the east and lay flat and white across the table. Iris was already seated, 2 folders in front of her, her reading glasses on. She did not look up. She was writing something in the margin of a document in a precise, unhurried hand. Douglas Fenn arrived at 8 minutes past the hour. Priya came in behind him. She was composed. She had worked at it. He could see the effort in the set of her shoulders, the careful neutrality of her expression. She sat across from Desmond and did not look at him immediately. She looked at Iris's 2 folders, then at Fenn, then, briefly, at Desmond. Something moved in her face when she looked at him, not the expression she had planned to bring into the room, something earlier than that, something that arrived before the planning could intercept it. Recognition, maybe, or the specific quiet weight of sitting across from a man you called an undergrade and being unable to escape the arithmetic of what that word now meant. She looked away first. Iris opened the first folder. Before any discussion of settlement terms, Iris said, I want to ensure that both parties are operating from a complete picture of the marital estate. She placed the first document, a certified summary of Okafor Capital's assets under management, the firm's independent valuation, and Desmond's ownership stake. 4. $3 billion under management. Founding partner equity at 41%. The firm's 7-year performance record appended as a single page. This is the asset basis for the primary marital estate instrument. Ben looked at the document. He had seen it before. Iris had disclosed it in the petition exhibits, but seeing it in the room, on the table, under the overhead light, was different from seeing it in a PDF. He read the ORM figure. He read the equity stake. He put the page down. Iris placed the second document, the structured transfer record. 43 transfers. $318,000. The 17-month timeline laid out in a clean table with dates and amounts. This is the financial documentation we submitted with the petition. For the record, we are characterizing these transfers as dissipation of marital assets under New York Domestic Relations Law, Section 236. Ben said something about Priya's intent and the nature of the transfers. Iris listened to it without expression. Then she placed the third document, the UC lien filed by Marcus Hale. $85,000 personal loan 6 days after Priya left. The lien encumbering personal property she had taken from the marital residence. We include this, Iris said, her voice precisely level, not as a characterization of Mrs. Okafor's choices, but as a material fact about the financial encumbrances currently attached to the assets she is claiming as her own. The room was quiet. Fen looked at the lien. He looked at Priya. His expression was the expression of an attorney who has just learned something about his client's situation that his client did not fully disclose in their intake meeting. Priya was looking at the table, not at the documents specifically. At the table itself, the wood grain of it, the way you look at something neutral when you are trying to keep your face from doing what it wants to do. Something moved across her expression. 5 things, quickly, in the order that things move across a person's face when the architecture of what they believed becomes visible for what it actually is. She had spent 17 months building toward a life she had decided she deserved. She had looked at the man across the table and seen the accord, the glasses, the note cards, and she had decided she understood the asset base. She had read the wrong documents. Desmond stood. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Iris's hand. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned to Priya. He said it quietly, only for her, not as performance, not to be cruel. Because he had spent 8 years trying to explain something she hadn't wanted to hear, and this was the last time it needed to be said. You didn't upgrade, he said. You just moved to a smaller position and didn't read the terms. He walked out without looking back. The settlement was finalized 4 months later. The $318,000 in structured transfers was returned in full, characterized in the settlement as the dissipation the documentation showed it to be. Priya's share of the marital estate was calculated correctly. 8 years of genuinely shared assets, joint savings, the furniture, the personal property not encumbered by Marcus Hale's lien. It was not nothing. It was a fraction of what she had been expecting when she made the calculations that preceded the exit. The lien from Marcus Hale was her problem to resolve. Fen had made a note of it. Nobody in the room had been surprised by that either. Marcus Hale, as Desmond had heard through Gerald, who had heard through the kind of small-world New York channels that financial industries run on, had his own financial complications. The senior partner position at Callaway Strategies was real. The Porsche Cayenne was real. The lifestyle was partially real and partially structured around a credit position that was increasingly difficult to service. Priya had moved toward what she believed was solid ground, and the ground had its own fault lines. Desmond did not follow that story closely. It was not his to follow. He had a portfolio to run. He had Howard Chen's company to support through its transition. He had Gerald to mentor, because Gerald was the kind of analyst you found once in a career if you were paying attention. He had Iris's counsel on 2 new acquisition targets that had come in through the network in the months since the Meridian closing. He answered every call the same day. He returned every email before the end of the week. He hit every timeline he committed to. By the following spring, Okafor Capital had 6 people in the business development function instead of 3. The first time in 7 years the firm had grown faster than Desmond had originally planned. He had let it. On a Thursday morning in September, Desmond was at his desk by 6:15. The city was still grey outside the windows. The monitors were on. The office was quiet in the particular way it was quiet before anyone else arrived, the best kind of quiet there was. He took the note card from his shirt pocket. He wrote 3 things. Chen call, 7:30. Review Singh, term sheet, note cards, reorder. He set the note card on the desk beside the keyboard where he could see it. He put on the reading glasses. He began. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.